Good morning, Peter. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Oh. So who's got news? All right.
News about what?
Yeah.
Well, news can just be news.
Oh,
Doesn't have to be about what. You tell me about what.
I learned.
I'm not looking for news on a specific item. You know, it's just like you got news.
I learned some news about the law today. I mean,
What
this
was
week.
that?
Because my sister's husband passed away, and my best friend's sister's husband passed away, but neither one of them had wills, and it automatically assumed everything goes to the spouse or the kids. And I learned that that's not the case.
Well, it depends.
Yeah, I spoke with a lawyer in regards to like the car. If the car was just in the spouse name, he said you can go to motor vehicles, bring death certificate and marriage certificate, and they'll change it. But if you have, say you have a house and the house is just in your spouse's name,
Mhm.
then they said you have to get a administrator to be, and you have to get a lawyer to be over like the bank accounts and different things like that.
Well,
Sorry
without,
for the loss.
yeah, I mean, without knowing the details, it is certainly better to have everything jointly held. Everything is
Right.
jointly held, then there's no issue. But if it's not jointly held and there's no will, then it's going to be probated, and
Right.
the fancy term is per stirpes. But
Per stirpes.
yeah, that's the fancy term. That's why.
And what does that mean?
How the hell do I know? Per stirpes is the manner in which an intestate, which is intestate means without a will, estate passes. So
Mhm.
generally it passes from, in other words, if I were to die intestate, the question would be, does the estate go to my children,
Mhm.
or does it go to my spouse?
Yeah.
So intestacy is when it passes without a will, and then it basically dictates how the estate is dissolved. So it is better to get an attorney, that's for sure.
Yes, that's what he said.
Yeah. And somebody who specializes in estates. You just don't.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, that was news. See, that was news.
See,
So,
yeah,
you don't
I
have to
learned
say about
something.
what now. It's that news. I mean, there's news.
Yeah, I learned something new. But most people believe that I spoke to, well, then everything goes to the spouse or the kids. And I'm like, that's not true.
Well, it's true as a general principle, but there are exceptions to it. In any
Yes.
event, what many people say, you see, many people call analytical reasoning logic games. So the fact that many people say something only makes me more doubtful that they're correct. So, but yes, you don't want to be one of the many people. You want to be the person
Right.
to whom these questions come, and they pay you to answer them.
Right.
There you go. Now you go. All right.
I have a question.
Okay.
I just wanted to know from the group when everybody's taking the LSAT, or I know somebody asked in our group chat if anybody was wanting to get together to study. So I'm still open to that. If I know everybody's schedules are different, but especially the sections where some of us maybe struggle, maybe there's somebody else who, is good at that section, but I just didn't know when everybody's actually taking the LSAT or scheduled. I'm scheduled for October.
Yeah, I'm not scheduled.
Okay.
For November.
Oh, there's Julie.
Yeah. Hi.
I didn't see you last time. I thought we lost you.
No, you didn't. Last I had I guess that's my new I had RA trainings. I was working from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day
Oh, wow.
for 2 weeks. So it was a self-care choice. I was like, I cannot like wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a me thing, but that won't be happening again, guys. Thank you for noticing that though. I appreciate you. Also, like me personally, I will be taking my test in November if that's fine.
Okay. But I am still very open to studying with somebody because, you know, I think I'd benefit from that.
Yeah.
Kind of somebody to hold you accountable to, like you have scheduled times and dates that you're going to study together. So
Need that too. Yeah, that account.
Yeah, I would be interested. Yes.
Okay.
Me personally, I don't like setting dates. So if anybody wants to like set a date, I will just like amp you up. So just someone choose one and I'll just be there to, you know.
okay.
What is everybody's availability though? That also, because you know, we all study here, but some of us all also do work. So that's
Yeah.
another thing.
I'm free Tuesday, Wednesdays, personally,
Okay.
At what time?
all day.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
Wednesdays, and just after Wednesdays after 1, but free all day for both days.
I work the whole week, but 8 to 4. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe an evening would be good.
Yes.
yeah.
And I also do plan, CJ, to take mine in November as well.
Mhm.
Okay.
And anybody else who would like to take theirs in November, registration closes the 29th, just to let you guys know that ahead of time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So a word of, I suppose, caution on this. You should all, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world to have a plan A and a target date. It is, I think I'm quite certain, it's more common than not that plan A's fall by the wayside. And just be prepared. Look, either this test measures whether you can think like a lawyer or it doesn't.
Mhm.
Okay. So, but again, my thing is think about how you think. Just step back and reflect on how you come to conclusions. And a lot of us come to the conclusions, they'll introduce a conclusion by saying, I heard, and then they get a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to which I'm saying, why am I even breathing next to this person? Because you're giving me somebody else's conclusion. So if this test actually measures, are you wired to think like a lawyer? Then to do well on the test, you have to be so wired or get so wired, right? If it's testing that, that's a handful. If it's not testing that, then you're in the wrong place. You know what I'm saying? Because then I'm wasting your time. But what I want you to stop and think, so when you set dates, you really, it's difficult, and for some people going to be impossible, right? To set the date at which you will demand of yourself, you will then think like a lawyer. Right? And it probably is a challenge for most people to think this way. Again, I do, so it can't be all that hard. But I don't know what I don't know. And my experience in this world informs me that this is not analogous to school, where your exams are coming up in December, as it will be in law school. But in law school, you get in not exclusively, but primarily, you get into law school after you show evidence that you can reason this way. That's what the LSAT does. So the LSAT has nothing to do with content. Nobody's going to require, you're not going to learn anything about the content of civil procedure or con law or conflicts or criminal procedure. You're not going to learn any of that from me in this forum. No, there is no content. But you're able to learn all that in law school, which is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift to sit in where the person at the front of the room, again, I don't want to, but it's not rare, right? That the person in the front of the room is very well versed in the subject matter, knows they're very well versed in the subject matter, and has his or her head up his or her ass. And so and again, there are certainly exceptions, but it's not rare. What I'm saying is the environment you're going into academically in law school, right? And academics is very much part of law school. Is in itself really demanding. So what the LSAT is doing is it's trying to send into this demanding environment future law school students who have the wiring, so you're not trying to learn how to reason this way at the same time I'm going to be discussing Supreme Court reasoning with you, right? So that's what the LSAT's doing. And it's a real challenge. And for a majority of you guys, it's going to take patience and persistence. So what I don't want you to do is set a plan A and then stick to it come hell or high water. If the evidence is consistent with your conclusion, then you move forward. If the evidence is not consistent with your conclusion, you don't move forward. And if you haven't gathered adequate evidence, you're not ready. So, you really need a strong, from my perspective, you need to think this way before you take the test. And you certainly need to think this way once you're in law school. So by all means, have a plan A, but be humble and wait for the evidence. And then
I have a question.
again, that's good.
It's actually about more on the website. I don't know if anyone else has been having an issue, but I haven't been able to log in to the portal, the Focus Approach portal, to like see as like when it says log in, I haven't been able to log in.
Okay, well, let's handle that separately, Julie. There's just, unless somebody else is having that problem, I
That's
can.
my question. If anyone else hadn't dealt with it, fixed it, everyone's logged in. Okay, that's just me then. Okay, I'll wait till after then.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the login, typically the issue is either the password or the username is not the same as the password or the username that you started with, which I can fix in a heartbeat on my end.
I'll wait till after. Thank you.
But yeah, I don't want you not to have access to that. So if that's still a problem, let me know, and we'll take it. We'll have a phone call, or I'll take you through it on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course. Okay, and then one final thing here. Look, in terms of what the test expects of you, and therefore what you need to expect of yourself. Memorization is, to me, a more basic form of intelligence. Memorization is essentially you're just repeating what somebody else said, right? So and you no longer need to look at text; you can simply repeat it, right? that plays almost no role in this test. I think a step up from memorization is interpretation, right? So you could memorize a poem by, say, Shelley or Yeats or whatever, right? You could memorize the poem, but that's not the same as being able to interpret the poem, right? Which is to say, give it meaning. You guys with that these are distinguishable.
Yes.
And the interpretation requires, and again, it's not a question of somebody being smarter, or it's just a different level that you're functioning at. So interpretation is, to me, a more elevated level than memorization, which itself is a more elevated level than somebody who can't memorize. But there's a third piece to this, which is what you're trying to get to. You're trying to get past memorization, and you're actually trying to get past interpretation. It's a necessary condition you would be able to interpret, but it's not a sufficient condition. And this third piece, which again, you keep elevating the reasoning that's required of you. So I'm saying this is a process. So don't get stuck in some deadline date where you haven't made it all the way up this ladder. Because that third step after interpretation is application. And so not only are you now interpreting and again, interpretation becomes more challenging or less challenging based on, well, whatever it is you're trying to interpret, right? I mean, if you're trying to interpret an episode of Charlie Brown's Christmas, well, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward to do that. But if you're trying to interpret a scientific study on the albedo effect and how it interacts with the climate, that may be more challenging. And law school is far more in that area, right? Where it's not Charlie Brown's Christmas that you're interpreting and applying. And no, it's now something analogous to, well, what is the albedo effect, since I've never heard of it? And so first I have to interpret what is it, right? And then I have to apply it to a specific problem, like, okay, what's the relationship between albedo and climate? Do you get how much more challenging that is?
Yes.
Well, that's law school.
Mhm.
So law school is not just, there's a Supreme Court decision you agree or disagree with. Goodbye. Those days are over. This is now, first, you have to interpret the reasoning, and then you have to apply that reasoning to whatever situation comes up. And that's what the LSAT is testing, is your natural ability to do that. What is your natural ability? I give you a problem, I make it up. It's a hypothetical. And what I'm looking for is, are you properly interpreting what I'm writing? And do you have the ability to apply it to complete, if you think about parallel reasoning is all application. Can you apply what you have interpreted to a completely different situation? That's analogy. Every analogy requires one, interpretation of the original statement, and two, application to a different situation. So do you get this is a level of intelligence not terribly closely related to memorization that the test is requiring you to demonstrate? Talk to me. That's not talking to me. That's being
Yeah.
quiet.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And think about, so like this is not some kind of long-winded thing. Think about what we've done, the little we've done in logical reasoning. Doesn't logical reasoning require you first to interpret, which is to understand
Yes.
the argument itself? And then doesn't it require you to take that understand and apply it to whatever the writer wants it applied to. So I want you to weaken an argument. Well, that means I have to apply it to a scenario where it's weakened. Or, you know, I want you to draw an analogy. Well, that means you have to interpret and then apply it. So that whole section is here. Analytical is no different. Analytical reasoning is there is no memorization. There is no memorization in logical reasoning. There's none, zero. It is, first I have to, in analytical, first I have to interpret, but here I'm interpreting statutorily, word by word. That interpretation requires building the law that follows from the law I was given. So it's not just the original law, right? It's now I have these conditions that change the original law. So that's, I'm now interpreting. I'm saying, oh, okay. So if you said to me, like M was one of 7 people, and then you said to me, well, M couldn't be first or second, or M couldn't be 6th or 7th. Well, my interpretation is that M would have to be 4th, 5th, or 6th. Right? So interpretation is that building, that's the organizing of the information. The managing of the information is the application. So now you said to me, okay, I've interpreted this original information, so M's got to be 4, 5, or 6. Now you say, I want you to apply it. I'm going to give you a hypothetical that M can no longer be 5th. Well, if you give me a hypothetical that M can no longer be 5th, right? And it could only have been 4th or 6th, well, then it has to either be 4th or 6th. So do you get, and reading comprehension is going to be no different. So I urge you to approach this test having in mind when you're going to start law school and using all of the time in advance of that date to your advantage. So if I'm sitting where you are and I'm saying, well, you know, I'd like to go in January, so if I can do that, I'm going to do it. And I'd like to get this application in sooner rather than later. But you see, I don't care what you'd like, because it's what the evidence informs you, not what you want. I don't care what you want. It's great when what you want intersects with what you can expect, right? But if I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you know, the goal here is to go to law school. So I'm not going to compromise that goal because someone tells me, well, you know, you got to get that application in by November, or it's going to be more competitive. Well, you know, it's really not about that. It's about when am I prepared to take this test, right? And there is no one at the other end of my voice who wants to start law school next August. There is no one who will not achieve that with an adequate LSAT score in April or May. No one. So your agenda should be, in my view, to really slow down and think about how you think, and over time, not right again, unless you just naturally think this way, right? But over time, you're going to start to see a difference if you can reason this way. And if you can't reason this way, then it's probably better not to go to law school and spend that time and money. So that was my my 2 cents for today. Any questions on that or any comments on that? Slow down and understand you're really trying to do something big here. You're trying to think like a lawyer. Okay. All right. So, I think what I'm going to do is just, I want to get to the analytical, but I also want to get some reading comprehension in. All right. Because we haven't done that. We haven't touched it yet. And so I think what I'm going to do is do the reading comprehension for the, you know, till the break. And then after the break, come back to the analytical. But at least in the analytical and the logical, you have a high level view of how to approach it. I do want to go over in analytical, I do want to go over the either or situation, which we will. Again, and as you do analytical, I know it's hard, and it may even be frustrating, but it's not about the answers. It's not about the answers. They give you the bloody answers. It's about the understanding. It's about really being skilled at identifying the hypothetical. So am I looking at order, assignment, combination? If it's order, is it relative order or is it fixed order? I say we'll do the either or thing today, and is it that? And then the skill of keeping your wits about you while others are digesting the flawed principle that they don't have enough time. You have the same amount of time they do. They're the ones that don't have enough time. You have a plan and you have time. So what I want to do is share some of those. Let me just give you the on reading. So is everybody okay with that? We'll do reading comp, then break, and then we come back and do analytical. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
All right. So here's the deal in reading comprehension. And I think the error that is most commonly made is the reason it's there. You want to be lawyers. So you have to read complex reasoning written by highly educated specialists in their field. So, I mean, if you think of Supreme Court, if you think of what is common to each of the 9 Supreme Court justices, is that they are highly educated specialists in their fields. Whether, individually you prefer one's reasoning to another, who cares? There are 9 very bright puppies. And much of the reading you do in law school, it's almost the only reading you do in law school, is written by individuals who are very well versed in the subject matter, and the subject matter itself often is really complicated. And you can't just say, I agree, and move out. Because again, think about law school. The only way I know whether you agree with me is by my giving you a hypothetical having nothing to do with the actual content, but everything to do with its reasoning. And I give you a hypothetical of something entirely different. And what I'm looking for in your answer is not which side you came down on. I don't care. What I'm looking for is, did you adopt the reasoning that was there? Well, that's the application part. That's, it's really take a deep breath and just you're trying to be lawyers. It's not kid stuff. And again, it's not, I mean, there are so many people I know who are really, really smart, who know lots of things I'll never know. And they include doctors. But tons of people I know that it's very clear to me they've made the correct choice by not being a lawyer. So it's not just how bloody smart you are. You don't have to be all that smart. I imagine it's helpful, but I wouldn't know. But it's not about that, right? It's about this related intelligence. So what you're up against in reading comp, and each of these sections is like a trial for you, and you want to prepare for your reading comprehension section. So to me, that begins with an understanding of what do they want. What the reason it's there is, can you read complex text? That's why it's there. Now, it's not just to read the complex text, and it's certainly not to memorize the complex text. So what a lot of people do, I believe, is overread reading comprehension. Do not overread this. This is the opposite of analytical reasoning. Analytical reasoning is designed so you have to pay attention to every single word and all punctuation, because there aren't a lot of words and it's not a lot of punctuation. Reading comprehension is the opposite. And the reason I suspect for that is those are the two areas that most reflect what's going to happen in law school. You're going to have classes that are regulatory, that are statutory. So if you're in like New York, right, you're going to take New York criminal procedure. Well, procedure is written down. It's procedure. You'll take the CPLR, which is the civil procedure. Well, it's written down. What is it? You know, you get X number of days before you have to file in this case. And if it's this, then you have to X number of days. And when you file, it's got to be stamped and notarized and put in the U. I mean, it's very, very, very specific. That's the analytical reasoning. You will have to take multiple law school classes in statutory and regulatory matter. Then there's the reading comprehension, which is the case law. And a bunch of law school is case law, property law, contract law, civil procedure law. I mean, there are overlaps in some of this stuff, con law. But what you're doing there is something very different. In con law, you're not reading you're not reading a statute. In con law, you're reading the Dobbs case, right? You're reading text. And that's a very different skill, because what's going to happen is you're going to throw yourself off the roof of the building in law school if you try to overread the case. Like if you're trying to read, and if you're trying to memorize, you're toast. Because nobody's going to ask you for your final exam, nobody's going to ask you what the holding was in the Dobbs case. Nobody cares. That's not what we're testing you on. We're testing you on what's the principle that the court is enunciating, what's the principle the dissent is enunciating, and then how is that principle applied in the practical world? So nobody cares whether you, or nobody should care, whether you agree or disagree with the decision. Can you interpret it? Can you apply it? If yes, you go to law school, no matter what side this is you're on. If it's no, then you shouldn't go. So the reading comprehension is giving the law school information about, do you have the academic infrastructure? And you've got to have a grounded sense of where you are on the reading comprehension scale, because I'm not going to be able, there's nothing I can do, nothing material I can do with respect to where your reading comprehension skills are, right? Because if you don't know how to read, well, you're not going to be a lawyer. If you don't comprehend what you read, well, you're not going to be a lawyer. And again, depending on what you're reading, if you're reading Charlie Brown's Christmas, you're going to comprehend it. But if you're reading the Dobbs decision, where again, your own view is obstructing your reading, well, if you can't understand what the writer writes, you don't belong in law school. So the way you'll approach reading in law school is the way you approach reading comp on this test, which the principle really is simple. Just stop reading for detail. You don't read for detail. You read, so again, when I say a high level read in reading comprehension, when the writer wrote what you're reading, the writer had a purpose. Say you're reading 4 paragraphs. Okay. Well, the writer had a design. So if I'm writing a passage, and I'm going to write about Hans Morgenthau because most people never heard of Hans Morgenthau, and that's why it would go on the LSAT. But I'm saying, well, they want me to write this, and so I have to have a design. So the writer has a design. And every writer will have a different design for whatever they're writing. So if I'm writing on Morgenthau, I'm saying, all right, you know what I'm going to do in the first paragraph? I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Morgenthau. That's my purpose of the first paragraph. On the second paragraph, I'm going to introduce Morgenthau's theories of international relations, which means I'm now going to be writing about unipolar, bipolar, and multipolar systems, international systems. So again, the writer's not going to be familiar with that, probably. And so that's my purpose of my second paragraph. But my third paragraph, you know what I want to do is I want to insert a challenge to Morgenthau in my third paragraph. So my third paragraph, I'm going to present to you two other writers who took issue with Morgenthau. So my third paragraph is intended to attack the second paragraph. But you know what? You know what I'm not going to tell you? I'm not going to tell you that I agree with Morgenthau, which I actually do. So I'm not going to tell you that. So when I'm writing the second paragraph, you see, that's describing Morgenthau's theories. I'm going to write them in the most positive light possible. But when I go to the third paragraph, and I'm presenting you with two folks who are attacking Morgenthau's theories, you're not going to get them in the strongest light. You're going to get them in a problematic light. Like I'm going to make it seem like this is being presented by somebody who's objective, but it ain't. And so I'm going to present their arguments in such a way that I can attack them. And when will that attack take place? That'll take place in the fourth paragraph. Because in the fourth paragraph, I've decided, basically I'm going to sum up, and I'm going to sum up by pointing out the weaknesses of the folks I mentioned in the third paragraph and bolstering the information that was presented to you in the second paragraph. That's what you're being tested on. If you get that, if you can say after reading this, right? Oh, no, I see what they're doing, right? I got it. Like I didn't know what they were doing till I got down there to the fourth paragraph, because I read the first paragraph and it clearly was an introduction. I read the second paragraph and it was clearly, this guy's just describing what Morgenthau was writing about. And then I read the third paragraph and said, yeah, now, okay, this guy is now presenting alternative views. But when I get to the fourth paragraph and I see that the alternative views are being attacked, but Morgenthau's views are being bolstered, that's when I'm saying, oh, okay, I can now interpret this. So it's about interpretation, because the writers don't tell you. Do you really think whoever's at the front of the room in a college or a university typically is giving you both sides of the story with no position whatsoever of their own woven into that?
No.
Right, because you
No.
want acolytes, right? So I get acolytes by convincing you without being obvious.
Mhm.
Okay, well, you don't want to be acolytes. You shouldn't want to be acolytes. So that's what's going on in reading comp. You get it? So you want to start training yourself to read for the role in the argument of each paragraph. Kabish? So
Yes.
Okay.
it's the least textual reading on the test. In logical reasoning, you are reading textually and you are reading sentence by sentence. And you don't move from one sentence to another until you understand the sentence you just finished. In analytical, it's word by word. It's like, hello, you mess up one word, you failed to understand the word or, you're out of the box. Reading comprehension is not either of those two things. Reading comprehension is, can you step back And after you read this reasonably complex text, can you say, oh, yeah, here's what they were doing, right? And then what they're testing you on, so that's the big, you would change the way you read. In reading comprehension, do not overread. If you're like using I mean, people are different, so I don't get the highlighter thing. You know, it's like anybody who's preparing for the LSAT with cue cards, you should just be sent to prison. I mean, it's like, shoot me. There's no memorization, so what's the point of a cue card? You know, that's not the intelligence. The intelligence is interpretation and application, and it takes time. So in reading comp, the interpretation is, okay, here's where that person was going. I got it. The most obvious payoff for interpretation is the main point question. Because the main point question is almost always there. And all that's requiring is that you interpret. What was the person's main point? Now, if you miss in my reading of my hypothetical, if you miss that my main point in that hypothetical really was, I was attempting to persuade you, then you're going to get it wrong because you didn't interpret it correctly. You with me? If you're reading it like every word is just, you know, it's there, it's written, so it's so, or you've heard it a million times, so it must be so. Yeah, no. Interpretation comes up. Primary purpose is generally about twice on the test. Primary purpose, which is why am I writing it? The main point, which is the content of it. What was my main point? There are questions that require you to use application, and they tend to be among the more challenging because the application, say in my hypothetical, right? In that second paragraph, I'm very, very briefly describing the three structures that Morgenthau writes about: unipolar, bipolar, multipolar. And I give you just enough information so you understand what they are. And then at the end, in the fourth paragraph, I say, Morgenthau's right. Well, what if in that second paragraph, I told you that Morgenthau believed that a unipolar system was the most stable, right? And then in the fourth paragraph, I'm saying, without coming out and saying it, but I'm saying, you know, it seems to me Morgenthau's probably right. Well, that's interpretation. Application would be, what would Morgenthau have a positive view of the international system immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, where there was only one dominant power in the world, and that was the United States, right? You said, well, where did that come from? That's application. That shows me you actually, not only do you understand, not only can you interpret, but you can apply the interpretation to a new situation. I want you in my law school class. I so want you in my law school class. So again, there are no shortcuts for this. It's going to come with practice. It's going to come with time. This is right now should not be about testing. Because if you get this down, again, it's the same bloody thing, it's technique. If in reading comprehension, you get down this technique, and the IRAC is all the same, the IRAC in reading comprehension, the issue is the question, right? What's the main point? Oh, okay. The rule is the passage. You have to understand the passage. So the passage is like 4 logical reasoning arguments in one place, right? Because like a logical reasoning argument might be the equivalent of a paragraph, right? So there's a lot more reading here. And as a consequence of there being a lot more reading burden, you don't have to read with the same specificity. You're not reading so much for the word most or the, that's, you will be reading for that in the other sections, but the word few, what does word few mean? I mean, it has this band. I don't know what the word few means, right? So in the other two sections, yeah. Although that word should not appear at all in analytical, because analytical is statutory, the language should be clear, right? But where the language is ambiguous, that should be in logical reasoning, because I'm looking for you to read the word some in logical reasoning, right? I want you to read the word some, and I want you to think it means fewer than half, which most people, I think, would say. We say, what does word some mean? And you say, well, less than half or something. Well, and of course, all some means is not all. So, some is 99 out of 100, but it's not the way in regular life we use the word. That's really all this is, right? So in reading comprehension, the ambiguity of like regular words is the whole 9 yards. In analytical, there should be no ambiguity because it's statutory language. And in reading comp, that's not what we're testing you for, because we already tested for the other sections. In reading comprehension, we want something. Do you belong sitting in a law school class? It's like, hello, like if somebody sent me to an engineering school, I'd be asking myself after 2 days, why am I here? I'm not interested in it. I don't know anything about it. I don't feel like I have an intuitive ability for it. What am I doing here? That doesn't mean I'm not, maybe not be bright, but this isn't my thing. So the reading comprehension is a wonderful opportunity if you're patient and persistent and can change the way you read, right? And again, the issue will be the individual questions. You get to those and they never changed. There are very few question types, which we'll get into. The rule is the entire passage. So if you don't understand the passage in its entirety, you're out of the box. The application is the same, right? So I've read the passage. The issue is tell me what the main point is. I should be able to tell you what the main point is. That's the application. Conclusion is the answer you come to. So does that make sense in terms of its construct? The first concept is high level read. Read, keep reminding yourself, it's the role in the passage of the paragraph, right? As opposed to in logical reasoning, it's the role in the argument of the sentence or of the clause.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. In reading comprehension, you're reading for the role in the role of the paragraph in the passage. So at the end of this, you should be able to say, I've read the passage. The role of paragraph 1 was X, the role of paragraph 2 was Y, and describe it. Which is analogous to logical reasoning, where you understand the argument itself by understanding. So imagine logical as being just a paragraph, and you understand the paragraph by understanding the role each sentence, or if necessary, each clause plays in that argument. So it's one's just the high level read and one's a much more detailed read. It's the same bloody principle, which again is all this is about argumentation. All this is about reasoning. It's got nothing to do with your personal views, right? Whatever personal views you have, it got nothing to do with this test. It's can you read with this kind of detail? Can you properly interpret what's there, not what you want to be there? And then can you apply what you have interpreted? And that's that. Each of these sections is the same thing in terms of, logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So did I answer your question, Julie?
Yeah, I just thought of it like a sandwich, if I'm being honest. And like the sandwich is the passage and each like thing is the, so if that helps anybody else, I don't know. Like that's how I'm thinking about it. I felt like one is like I put P1 intro, P2 facts, P3 argument, P4 conclusion. That's assuming there's like 4 parts. I don't know, based on what you said.
Well, yeah, I would say I like the sandwich analogy. Now I'm kind of hungry.
Me too. As far as
But I'm seeing it more, not so much as
a salad.
I don't do salad. Yeah, no, I'm seeing it more like my representative hero, which is a wedge, is ham, American cheese, and bologna. Who knows why? I'm seeing it more that way. I'm seeing, if I can identify that layer was the ham, this layer was the cheese, the layer underneath that was the bologna, and either mayo or probably mayo, but either mayo or mustard underneath, right? And lettuce, no, lettuce and tomato up top. If I'm able to articulate what's in that sandwich, I'm home. Because depending on the reading comp passage, things can be, it doesn't have to follow any order. So in other words,
Yeah.
right. You don't have to have an introduction in the first paragraph, right? You could have the author's conclusion in the first paragraph.
I understand.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, oh no. So like the conclusion would be the ham, right? Ham could be anywhere. So I think that's a great analogy. I mean, well.
And you're saying that analytical would be like maybe like a sushi. I don't know, like maybe something more specific and precise. You're saying?
Or perhaps sashimi wouldn't even have the rice.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I understand then.
But yes. And it really just comes down to changing the way you read and reminding yourself. It takes time to change. So any questions on when you're doing reading comprehension, fight that instinct to underline everything. Because really, they're either going to ask you for interpretation. So what I'm saying is the example of interpretation is they said, what's the main point? Oh, come on, right? What's the primary purpose? Come on. What was the meaning of the word advocacy in line 16? And that'll be there, right? And so you're asking me to interpret, right? And again, not all language, but vast majority of language is elastic, right? Meaning you can take the word exploit and your experience will inform you that that's a negative word. But it doesn't have to be a negative word. It can be placed into a positive context, right? So in reading comprehension, they can and will require you to interpret the meaning of a specific word. In law, we understand that words have neighbors. And the understanding of the word is often dictated by its neighbors. So you can completely change the meaning of a word depending on what word is next to it.
Give an example, please.
Well, so if I use the word benefit, and I say, well, the word benefit is going to be understood, like if it was just standing on its own, you just saw the word benefit, people would have, say, oh, that's a good thing. You know, benefits, that's a favorable thing. But there are a lot of things I can do with the word benefit. A lot of things. One, I can limit it, which actually is a case I had, which is, what if I say, what if you're, what if you want the benefit to flow to you and you're not a minor, and I've written that this benefit is, that this is for the benefit of the decedent's minor children, or is that this benefit is for child support. So if I say the benefit is for child support and you're not a child, did it benefit you?
No. Well, it could.
Yeah, the child, yeah.
It
Yeah.
could if I'm caring for the
No, but
child.
it limited you. It exited you out, like exempted you.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and that was an actual case I litigated, is if the expression to be held for the benefit of the children, if that is housed in the document under a section entitled child support,
Mhm.
how do you not read for the benefit of the children under child support, meaning child support exists only to a certain age, right, at which it ends. So
Yeah.
there are, and Sharita, and there are a bazillion, there's probably so many examples, I struggle coming up with one. But language has to be understood. And again, if you just go to that word exploit, and you see the word exploit, if I want to use the word exploit the way it's commonly used,
Mhm.
I'll say exploitation is something we wish to avoid. But if I want to, if I were working for the LSAC, what I would be trying, I would purposely use a word like exploit, to see if you can receive the word as it's not typically received, right? Which means I want to, which I think I brought up before, right? But if I say, I make a decision, I say, I want to exploit my workforce by decreasing the number of hours they work and increasing their pay. Well, all of a sudden,
That would be good.
yeah, son of a bitch. So we have, and again, I don't know any other language, right? I can't, I can speak four words of Gaelic or something, but I
I
mean,
was just thinking about the former president.
well, okay, you're entitled to that thought.
No, I'm just saying how it can be a benefit,
Yeah, no, and our language is very ambiguous. It's not precise. We have one use for the word love, but love's not the same thing. The love of my children is not the same as the love of my wife.
Right.
Or the love of my dog. Yeah, I mean, these are not three things that are the same, but we have one word we use for all of them. I mean, we use love for everything. Well, maybe we could get more specific and have a specific word for love of children, a specific word for love of parent, or, love of friend. But we don't have any of that stuff. We're Americans. Bullshit, Now, bullshit, there's a word that has an application that's generally understood. So, but this is what they're going at. And this is where if you don't understand that's what they're doing, you could be as bright as can be. And it's just passing you out. It's a blur, you don't see it. So have your guard up in logical reasoning for the fact that words need to be interpreted in the context they're in, and the legal principle really is. It is a legal principle. Words have neighbors. And you have to understand the word in the context of its neighbors, what other words are with it. And that gives you the fuller context.
Professor?
Mhm.
Or I don't know. Oh, I don't know. Okay. Yes, sir. I just wanted to offer something that helped me in interpreting it. I don't know if anyone's familiar with AAVE, but it's like African American vernacular. And in that, we often use like things like mad good, like dumb good, like, but like it's just basically what you're saying. I just think it's a more layman way to understand it. So like when you say dumb good, dumb is usually like, we have, the connotations to it. And by placing good on it after it immediately, it becomes like it accentuates the good. So it changes like the meaning
Absolutely.
of good. So I'm just
Okay.
saying, I feel like that's a very easier way to like, I guess, like digest,
I
that
agree.
principle. So I'm just putting it out there.
Thank you.
I agree.
Bad, good, crazy, just accentuates the good.
And again, how important is that as an attorney? And so just a wonderful example, Julie, and then you just speak, but its connection to, that's what we get paid to do, is to not just read the words, but we have to interpret what the speaker or the writer meant by the words. So you're right, if I see the expression dumb good, I'm trying to figure out, well, how does dumb modify good? Because it doesn't seem like it would. And that's what I get paid to do. And that's what you're going to get paid to do, right? Is to, one, interpret that, and then two, if necessary, apply it. All right. So again, in reading comp, interpretation is very much part of this. Memorization is not, which is why I'm saying don't try to memorize. Don't be highlighting every word, every line. You're going to be tested a little bit on recognition, but not very much. And the way you handle it is, again, one, you're tested on interpretation. Two, you're tested on application. So application is a step up, right, from interpretation, right? So one, you interpret. What's the main point? Okay, so if my main point is Morgenthau's theory of international relations is the most reliable theory that we have available at this time. If that's my main point, the application will be a separate question saying, well, based on what you read, what would Morgenthau's view be of an international system in which the United States is a declining power and China is an ascending power? There was no mention of the United States in here. There was no mention of China in here. But if you took away that, one, I'm supporting Morgenthau's theory, which nobody has read about. It's right out of law school. I rather doubt anybody at the other end of my voice has read Politics Among Nations. If you have, you need to get a life. So this is, it's so cool because it's what the vast majority of us never pick up, which doesn't mean we don't have wonderful lives at all. But it's just easier not to pick this stuff up, right? It's just, that other guy's smart or the other gal's smart. I'll just say what they said. Well, no thanks. So that's with the application part where you're saying, one, I've interpreted this correctly. Two, I can apply it to outside situations. If you take, just like a novel you may have read, and there's a protagonist in the novel. So it's very rare the reading comprehension doesn't have something to do with, maybe it's a novel, or maybe it's a play, or maybe it's a dance, right? And if it's a novel, there'll be a protagonist, right? So if I'm writing about a protagonist and I'm not challenging the protagonist, in other words, it appears to be the case that I think whatever the protagonist represents is a good thing. Oh, okay. Well, that's going to be interpretation, right? That the protagonist, that the author is favorable to the protagonist in a novel. You don't have to be favorable to a protagonist in a novel. If you read a novel, which all novels are literature. All literature contains messages. So just just because a writer, so if you've read, you may read a controversial maybe you've read Ayn Rand. Well, an awful lot of people would not accept Rand's philosophy. But Rand writes and she creates a protagonist. Well, but the protagonist represents Rand's philosophy. So if you don't agree with Rand's philosophy, you're not going to like the protagonist. Right? But whoever the writer is, once you assess, once you interpret, yes, this person is a fan, then the application will be, oh, okay, if this fictional character, this fictional protagonist, were faced with this set of facts in the year 2022, what would the protagonist's reaction to it be? That's all. So it's, again, reading as an agnostic, meaning just all I mean by agnostic is you leave your personal positions at the door. That's it, right? So if you're reading Freud, there have been reading passages on Freud. Well, there's been at least one, right? And I suspect in school, the way I was introduced to Freud was much more sympathetic than the way somebody recently was introduced to Freud. Okay, but the passage is, what is the author's view of Freud, not what is your view of Freud? And it could be positive, it could be negative, it could be neutral, it could be whatever a person wants it to be. That is interpretation. That's a higher form of intellect. You're reading something about the climate. Well, what if I put something on there that challenges your personal view of climate? Well, then I put something on there that, get over it. You have to read it as it's written and interpret it the way the writer meant for it to be interpreted. So that's the reading con. The third thing they do, so again, it's interpretation, it's application, and then there are about 5 or 6 of the 27 questions that are in the text. So what you're doing is you're not reading the passage for those specific questions. In other words, when you're reading, say in my paragraph 2, so I got all this fancy stuff going on about bipolar and unipolar and multipolar systems, right? And I'm saying to you, don't memorize that. Right, what you want to come out of the second paragraph is he's writing about what the content of Morgenthau's theory is, but don't try to memorize the content. So if you get to question number 4, and question number 4 says, which of the following is not one of the multipolar systems mentioned by the author? Well, that's a very specific question. What's not mentioned? So there, where you have a specific question, you go back to the text and you say, well, that was in paragraph 2. So I'm going to refresh my recollection and I'm just going to quickly read what's there. And then I'm going to answer the question.
I have a question about that specifically. So I know, like, on my own personal experience, I have trouble when it comes to finding the text. Like, I may recall, like, okay, they definitely talked about this, but I think I take a lot of time trying to find where I saw that. So is there like a method you recommend for, I don't know? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that is Julie.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
Can't wait to find out who it is.
My sister. I think she needs me. I'm gonna mute myself. I'm sorry, guys.
That's my ring.
I can't stop this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
She fled. So the answer to that is in terms of the, you know, if you look at the 27 questions, 21 of them, 22 of them, something like that, are either requiring interpretation or application. That's right. So you want to give us some context. Maybe 5 of them over the course. Now we're talking about 4 passages, right? Maybe there are 5 questions that send you back into the text. So what I'm saying for me, I can find those. Now, I don't want to go reading the whole passage to find them. So my purpose in reading the passage was, if there's any specific text they want about Morgenthau's background, that's in paragraph 1. If there's any specific text they want about the content of his theory, that's in paragraph 2. If there's any specific text they want about opposing views, that's in paragraph 3. And if there's any specific text they want about the author's overall view of this, it's in paragraph 4.
And that format's consistent?
I'm sorry?
What you just explained, is that format consistent in like in all reading comprehension problems?
Well, when you say is that format consistent?
The way you said, like referring back to, so let's say the question's referring to introduction wise to, I forget the man you're referring to. But if there was a question, you know, I'll go to 2. So let's say there's a question about his theory. Go to paragraph 2. I'll always go to paragraph 2 if that's like.
Well, you always go to paragraph 2 if that's where the theory is.
That's
if
what I'm
the theory is in paragraph 3, you go to paragraph 3.
That's what I'm asking. Yeah. Okay.
It's like where the ham is.
Mm-hmm.
Ham at the top, in the middle, where's the ham?
Okay.
Where's the beef?
Okay. I understand.
So it's not always going to be in the same spot.
Oh, good Lord, no.
Okay.
That would be great.
No.
Sometimes you're basically telling us sometimes it could be the cheese first, sometimes it could be lettuce.
And again, just think about
Gotcha.
what we take for granted. Even like you go to logical reasoning, or if you go to the construct of an argument, your inclination is you're going to read an introduction, then you're going to read the content, then you're going to, at the end of it, read the conclusion. So there's this order we place in our mind that has no place on this test. This is 0 place. I can put the conclusion anywhere I want. I can and will construct reading passages. I mean, I'd have a ball. I mean, I'm not going to do it, but I must say I'd have a ball doing this, just to mess you guys up. You know, I mean, it's you know, it's why you go to therapy. But you know, it's like, you know, where can I put the conclusion that's just going to mess everybody up? That said, it needs to be somewhere. And so what a test is your ability to understand and recognize what a conclusion is, because then it shouldn't matter. You know, if I'm saying, well, I'm going to put I don't know, I'm going to put a red Lexus out on the street, and I have 4 cars out on the street, and only one of them is a red Lexus. What difference would it be whether it was the first, second, third, or fourth car? Right? I mean, oh, that's a red Lexus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a conclusion. The conclusion is as distinct in an argument as the red Lexus is in my hypothetical. And again, that's application. What we're just doing now is application. Is oh, I see that. So so I'm gonna, let me share. So you get where I'm going here, and you want to practice this, right?
Yes.
No time restrictions. None, because you're changing the way you read. And if you do this, you don't go crazy, because reading comprehension, I mean, for most of us, it's boring. It's not for everyone. And not at all for everyone, because it's an opportunity to learn. So if you can like get to that point where I'm going to read something and I knew nothing about it, you're going to get way better at reading. You're going to be, it's a different type of reading, but you're going to get way, way better at it if you can approach it with a positive attitude. So let's see what we have here. Let me, I'm going to share some notes and then I'll send these along. These are the notes on reading comprehension. Let me share. Oh, okay, so you guys looking at the notes?
Yes.
So again, I'm not gonna, I'll just go through these quickly because you'll have them to review. The information at the very top comes right from the LSAC, which is, should come as no surprise that it's measuring your ability to read, but with understanding and insight. Examples of lengthy and complex materials similar to those commonly encountered in law school. Where's Aristotle? So think about that. Think about what they're telling, right? So this isn't me. Like, I'm not interpreting anything here, right? Because I'm always at risk of error when I interpret. This is from the Law School Admissions Council. So if you reason like a lawyer, then you say to yourself, so the purpose of this is to measure my ability to read with understanding and insight. Understanding and insight. Examples of lengthy and complex materials similar to those commonly encountered in law schools. Why in God's name would you be listening to someone who is saying to you, oh, all you have to do is circle the transition words. You circle the really important words and then you have everything. It's idiotic. And yet that's what's out there. So there is no shortcut. And then they go on here to explain the why. And they go on to say, both law school and the practice of law revolve around extensive reading of highly varied, dense, argumentative, and expository text. Yeah, son of a bitch. That does sound like it. For example, cases, that's reading comp, codes, that's analytical, contracts, briefs, decision, evidence. This reading must be exacting, which means textual, distinguishing precisely what is said from what is not. It involves comparison, analysis, synthesis, application, and as an example, principles and laws. It involves drawing appropriate inferences. Inferences involve application. So it involves drawing appropriate inferences and applying ideas and arguments to new contexts. Law school reading also requires the ability to grasp unfamiliar subject matter, the ability to penetrate difficult, challenging topics. So I just want to stop the share for just a second here. Okay. Do you have a sense for what they want from you? And yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that require, again, I can't do this for you. You can't rub my head and go to law school. Wouldn't your common sense tell you that this is going to require quite a bit of effort?
Yes.
Yes.
And shouldn't it require quite a bit of effort?
Yep.
Yeah.
So really, it goes to what's on your heart, and what capability do you have? What capacity do you have? Because not everybody has the capacity to do this, and that does not define them as a person, right? But it'd be shame. I have the capacity to be generous. We all have the capacity to be generous. Is it fair to say we're not always generous?
Yeah.
Yes.
So doesn't that stand for the principle that even though we have a capacity, we don't realize it all the time?
Yes.
So how much of a shame would it be if you had the capacity to make this journey, but you didn't exercise it on this occasion?
Tragic.
Yes.
Your life. I mean, again, you should, if it's not your life, for heaven's sakes, don't do it. There are a bunch of other ways to live a complete, full, and meaningful life. But like, to want this, like, and then to understand, oh, you mean this is what I got to do? Yeah, this is what you got to do. You either go, you don't have to do it with me, but you're gonna have to do it.
Right.
And it's okay not to succeed. That's okay. It's not okay to have regret. You know, it's not okay to give it a half-assed effort.
Right.
So, okay, let me go back to the share. But again, this is, each of these sections is so important for law school. Okay. Share. Oh, I lost my. Oh, here. I think that's it. I don't know if that's it. We'll see. Yeah. Okay. You guys are looking back at this, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm just going to run through it so that we can, because we're approaching the break, and I do want to make sure we have half of this class on analytical. What I want you to do is, as you read through this, right? I mean, you know, I have up here, there are mechanics to this in terms of the section, right? I mean, the big picture is you approach each and every passage the same way, which is, okay, let me read through it and identify the role in the argument of each, you know, paragraph. But the mechanics, you know, the difference between tactics and strategy. So the strategy is always going to be to, whatever passage you're reading, read it this way. And the strategy is always going to be IRAC, which is you keeping in mind the passage is the rule. And if you don't understand the rule, there's no way to successfully navigate IRAC as a reasoning method. But tactics are how you actually implement it, right? And so this is something you want to be aware of, passage selection. And at least initially, and this will, you know, depend on each of you, right? You want to defer, which is a postpone, or if need be, don't deal with the passage or the passages that appear to be to you the most difficult. And again, this is all the same stuff. In reading comp, the textual reading has to do with the paragraphs. The issue spotting in reading comprehension, it'll come, but you're always reading for the main point. You're always reading for the primary purpose. You're always reading to try to spot the author's attitude, right? So the author's attitude is in the, and you know, the author's attitude can be neutral. So when in terms of this issue spotting thing, it really has to do with what type of piece am I reading? Is this an advocacy piece? Is this an attack piece? Is this just somebody describing something? You know, they're taking no position at all. They're just describing something. Is this is somebody who's evaluating, right? So they're doing more than describing. Describing to me would be the Battle of Waterloo, which even I wasn't around for. You know, but maybe I'm just describing, here's how the battle went down. Oh, okay. So it's not advocacy. Maybe I'm a historian and I'm just describing it. You know, if you're evaluating, well, that's something that the FDA does, right? The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they evaluate the safety or the implications of food products or medicines, or so. The evaluation itself can be perfectly neutral. So you're saying, okay, what's the author's agenda? Because that will always be what the main point is. So if the author's agenda is to advocate, the main point will involve advocacy. If the author's agenda is, you know, I just want to evaluate something, well, the main point will evaluate it. there will be a comparison. And you need to plan in advance. So the comparative passages begin, I think, at prep test 52. And prior to that, there was no comparative passage. The comparative passages are different. They involve two voices, two writers. So it's not the narrative passages is just one voice. So, well, there may be multiple voices, but it's just one author. But the comparative passages, there were two authors. And you want to get a sense for, does the comparative passage present, is it more difficult for you? Is it less difficult for you? Or is it just exam dependent, meaning, you know, sometimes it's more difficult, sometimes it's less difficult, and I just have to judge it based on the exam. What they do in the comparative passage is there's a common thread connecting the two. So that's really what you're looking for, is the two passages are not completely random. You know, you may be reading one passage on the, you know, New York Yankees, you may be reading one passage on the New York Mets, but I imagine the common theme would be New York baseball or baseball, right? So again, you're saying, wait a minute, you know, you may be reading one passage is about a principle, and the other passage is about an example, but they're never connected because, well, the two authors never spoke with one another. So maybe I'm reading one passage on a description of enlightened self-interest, right? So it's some philosophy stuff. And then I'm reading a second passage on how a person behaves under a certain set of circumstances. Well, what you know is that these two things are connected. And what you're going to be tested on is, can you articulate, which is good. Again, you have to interpret it, right? You have to interpret, okay, here's what connects the two. So the comparative passages, again, there'll be one of four, and you want to decide in advance, have you formed a view? Because you could form a view that you're consistently so poor at the comparative passage that you're not even going to consider it on the test, or that you're consistently so strong, there's no way you're not going to do it. Or, you know, it's neither, right? So it's like, I got to get there and look at it. Okay. The digital format, you need to spend time with that. So, and you will, because you're on Law Hub, which is it's just a great tool, right? So practice on the digital format with, I'm going to stop the share here. Just practice on the digital format using it. You have tools up there. You have font size. You have line spacing. Well, you know what? If, you know, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to try a case, I'm going to check the courtroom out in advance. I'm going to go there in advance. I want to be as comfortable as I can be in the arena, because once I'm in the arena, well, hell's going to break loose. So I want to be as comfortable as I can be. So you're going to go into an arena, right? It's going to be test day. It's going to come on, and you're going to come into this reading comprehension section. So for me, I want the largest font size and the largest spacing. Maybe I want the smallest font size and the largest spacing. I just want to get that, whatever I want to know I want it before I take the bloody test. Maybe like when you open it up, your screen is going to be split, and the passage is going to be on your left, and the questions are going to be on your right. So you can say it's question number one, right? So you're going to see the passage on your left, question number one on your right. But I don't have to see it that way, because I can click on passage only. And in passage only, there'll be the left and the right-hand column will both be at the passage, and the questions disappear. So get in there, and it's like, there is no right or wrong way. It's the way that is most natural for you. But I want to know that in advance. And for me, I want to be aware of my reading burden. So when you're going to look at the 4 passages, and of course you're going to plan in advance how many of the 4 are you actually going to attempt. And for most people, for a majority of test takers, it makes more sense not to try to complete 4 passages. For majority, not, Lord knows, not for everyone, right? And you have to assess in advance, based on the feedback you get, what can you responsibly accomplish in 35 minutes? So we don't need to be there now, because the first thing is, first, you want to change the way you read, because the way you read now, unless you can sit down and take maybe 3 exams, three exams, reading comprehension in 3 separate exams, and score, I don't know, 19 to 21 or something. Well, if you're doing that, you don't need to change a damn thing. Because that's the evidence, right? So it's the evidence. The evidence is, well, you know what? Maybe these other ideas are good, but I'm kicking ass doing what I'm doing. Then you keep doing what you're doing. But short of that, you're going to start thinking about, am I excluding one passage, which now means I have, because you start out with basically, I think it's 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage. So you say, but wait a minute, when I give myself that time, I don't do well. Oh, okay. So maybe if you did all 4, you'd end up with a 12 or something, because you don't have enough time. But you say, well, wait a minute, what if I just do 3 passages instead of 4? Well, if you do 3 passages, now you don't have 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Now you have 11 minutes and whatever, right? Well, that's a lot more time per passage. Well, what if when I kick it up and I allow because remember what's involved here. I've got to read and stop. First paragraph, I'm going to read and go stop. Pause and say, okay, what did I just read? You're going to read the second paragraph. You can pause. Do I see how the first and the second paragraph are connected? You're going to read the third paragraph. You're going to pause. So you're incorporating this new way of reading where you're pausing, because that pausing is going to allow you to interpret. And you say, okay, so maybe when I do only 3, I'm getting a 5, a 5, and a 5, and then I'm guessing on the first one, and some of which now I'm up to a 16. So I'm doing fewer passages, but I'm getting a higher score. Yeah, hello. Yeah, now you explore. This is the beauty of being, to me, I mean, I love being an attorney. You just get to challenge everything and explore everything, and you just get to learn. Okay. And then you'll find there may be subject, there are people who are just intimidated by the science passage. I prefer you not be intimidated by it, but it's not the end of the world if you are. Then you say, okay, maybe I'm not going to do the science passage, but then you'll need to do the comparative passage, right? So if you're struggling with the comparative passage and you don't want to do the science passage, well, you're down to 2 passages. And that can be done, but it's not optimum, because if you're down to 2, you probably still end up getting the 5 and the 5. And so now you got a 10, and maybe you guess 2 right, and you got a 12. You can go to law school with a 12, but it's hard. You have to be very strong in the other sections to make up for it. So what I'll do is I'm going to stop here. I'm going to send that. Everybody will get the reading comp notes. And I think I think what we'll do is when we open up next week, let's open back up on the reading comp when you've had a chance to review the notes and stuff, and then go over what questions you have. But in terms of what I'd like you to do this week is just introduce yourself to reading comp. anyone is welcome. If you just want to see where you are, there is no harm in that. In other words, what I would do then is take, it doesn't matter what exams. I mean, I would say for reading comp, all the passages are still valid. But if you wanted to say, and I'm just taking 3 random exams, say you took exam 52, 53, and 54. So you don't, it's not too far back, but you're not compromising the material you want to prepare for the exam with. If you took those 3 exams, 52, 53, 54, just a reading comp, right? Under time conditions, you would get feedback. So if you're thinking, I just want to see where I am. Okay, that's fine. Just don't blow your brains out if it turns out you're not where you thought you'd be, right? And so that you're welcome to do that, and that's not something you need to do, but you're welcome to do that. And then, yeah, if you got the score you wanted, then just keep doing what you're doing. Don't pay any attention to me. But in the alternative, what I want you to do is now start thinking about how to read this in a different way, which means don't worry about the clock and just practice. Okay. What's the first paragraph there for? It's the role in the argument. What's the role in the argument of paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, paragraph 5? Role in the argument. That's what it is. Which would go over to logical reasoning. That's one of the issues, is role in the argument. And then let's regroup next week and follow up on this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, well, then it's 11:40, so let's take 10. And then we'll come back and jump into the analytical.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back.
Welcome back. All right. Let's do some analytical. So, please don't obsess over analytical. And don't lose sight that there are 3 sections of this test, and that is only one of 3. And why don't you tell me, for those of you who have had the opportunity to put in some time during the week, what if any impressions do you have of analytical?
Confusing to me.
Okay. Anybody else?
When I first started out, I did good. Then I don't know what happened after that. Go ahead.
Anybody else on the analytical? Any impressions?
Fixed order.
I'm sorry?
Fixed order.
Well, I'd say type, but what I'm asking you is do you have a sense that, again, this is so much, it's all technique. And do you feel like you're gaining some, and again, this should be a process, it's not memorization. It's you have a sense for, you're getting the hang of what is required in advance of being proficient at it. All right. Okay, well. So again, just what we did last week is, again, the big picture is what they want you to do is organize, manage, and solve. That's the whole 9 yards. And they're giving you statutory information. So they're starting out, everything above that colon is the original statute. That's what they're doing, just like in law school. And then the constraints, the information listed underneath it modifies the original information. So you had this original law, and now the law is subjected to typically anywhere from 3 to 5 changes. And more often than not, the changes overlap. You know, so if you were to analogize the letters up there, you know, the J, K, L, M, whatever they're, right? If you were to analogize those like states, and this law were affecting certain states, well, if K were the state of Kansas, and I saw that 3 of the new changes, said there were 5 changes, right? And if I saw that 3 of the 5 changes implicated the state of Kansas, well, I would begin my search there, because if the first change involves Kansas and Mississippi, and the second change involves Kansas and Louisiana and New York, and the third change involves Kansas and Wyoming, a lot of changes are going to affect the people in Kansas. And so it's not complicated. In other words, if there's no overlap at all, there's no law to build. Because if you just say you have 4 changes to the original law, 4 constraints, and no state is constrained more than once, then there's not much for me to build. But where a state is constrained multiple times, that's the whole purpose of it. That's the theory of your case. And that it's what law is. If I have one witness who gives me information about several other witnesses, that's a more important witness than somebody who doesn't give me any information or gives me very limited information. So what they're looking for is, 1, for you to understand what the original statutory language was. That's the information above the colon. 2, now you need to interpret how the modifications alter the original information. And that leads to the derivative law. So again, it's just all kind of like, look, I don't know. It does seem to me this is just stepping up in forms of intelligence.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you talk about the derivative law, are you referring to, for example, how maybe the 4 conditions would impact Kansas? So let's say like the derivative was that, so because of this law and the constraints, the derivative law would be, I guess, all the constraints Kansas now has. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it would be, the derivative law is basically what you end up with. So if you were ordering the states and the original law said nothing about when we would visit Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just 1 of 7 states we're going to visit, but it didn't tell me when. But the first constraint tells me we have to visit Kansas after we visit Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that's the first derivative, because Kansas now can no longer be the first state.
I understand. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then, but I'm saying the more often Kansas is limited, the more information you get about it, right? So if some other constraint says, well, not only do we have to visit Kansas after Louisiana, but Kansas has to fall in between Connecticut and New York. Well, no, wait a minute. Now, Kansas can no longer be the first or the second state visited, nor can Kansas be the final state visited. So when you've done weaving all that together, you have the derivative law.
Mm-hmm.
And if your derivative law is, if it's not complete, then it's going to be really difficult. So so again, the form of intelligence is, this is not a speed test. This is a recognition test, because they're not going to change anything. What you see on the test is what you have. You're just seeing different examples of the same principle. So either like you recognize, oh yeah, that's relative order, right? Or you don't. Either you recognize fixed order or you don't. They're not hard. They're not, it's not, I don't mean, it doesn't strike me they're hard to, they're unfamiliar, right? So that's where they start. I'm going to start by creating a test where I want to see, okay, I'm going to give you information which can be organized by either fixed or relative order, or it can be organized simply by assigning one thing to another, or it can be organized by a combination of both, where I want you to both order something and assign. So you do both functions are present, and that may or may not be complicated. It's up to me. I may make it so that it's not at all complicated. You know, there isn't a baseball team in the world that's ever played a game where there hasn't been both order and assignment. So what's complicated about that? You're going to tell me, all right, Scott's going to play shortstop. That's an assignment, right? And bat third. But why is that hard? But I can make it very hard if I want to. I can say, well, you know, actually it's not baseball, and it's that Scott is a language. So we're going to learn the Scottish language, and we're going to go on a tour, and we're going to have a tour guide, and there are going to be 4 tour guides, and only 2 of them speak Scottish. And we have to be assigned to both a tour guide who speaks a specific language, and then we're going to go visit these countries in a certain order. Well, I don't know you, but I'm ready to blow my brains out, because now I've got tour guides, languages, and ordering. So that seems a whole lot more complicated than saying to me, Scott's going to play shortstop and bat third. So what you don't want to do is say, oh, that's too complicated. Because it's, you make that assessment during the test. That's the only time you can make that assessment. You know, fixed order can be very straightforward, and it can be deadly. Relative order can be very straightforward, and it can be deadly. So, and you know, and part of what the test is, one, do you understand that's what they're doing? And 2, have you practiced enough so that you recognize, no, I got to stay away from that, or no, I got that this is a gift. And of course, interwoven in all that is, what's your plan? Because if your plan is, which too many folks, I believe, right, they have no plan. They're going to answer the whole test. Why? Because that's what they've always done, right? Answer the whole test. Yeah, I always answered the whole test. I always got A's. Well, quite likely you're going to get your ass kicked. Not foregone conclusion, but quite likely. So you prepare in advance. If you establish you're not going to get your ass kicked by doing all 4, then of course you do all 4, but you establish that in advance, right? And then for the vast majority of test takers in analytical, you're looking at either 2 or 3 of these hypotheticals. Right? And then it's making choices. Which are the 3 that I want to do? So were there any questions just about understanding the difference between fixed order and relative order? Fixed order being where I have a pivot. It's like a seesaw. I've got a pivot. Somebody had to be 3rd or 5th. right? That means, oh, okay, well, if Tennessee had to be the third or the fifth state visited, well, then in one scenario, I'm going to make Tennessee the third state. And in a different scenario, I'm going to make Tennessee the fifth state, right? And then if Tennessee tells me something about Mississippi, like Mississippi's got to be visited before Tennessee, well, then in that first scenario where Tennessee is third, Mississippi's got to be first or second. So I put a little M in there and I put little arrows over, that's got to be Mississippi, and you're making a visual.
I do have a question, and you touched on it just now. It's the visual aspect. I understand in theory, but when it comes to visualizing mentally and writing it down, I just want to know like how you recommend that, because I feel like that's a lot of information to like these trial and errors to do in like my brain. I would like to know how to like,
It is. I agree. And map it out.
yeah, to map it out.
Yeah, it is
Well,
kind of difficult.
Yeah, if it weren't challenging, I don't think it should be on the test.
I mean, like, how do we visualize that on paper? I guess my question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I have a constraint, well, just the example I'm just using. So let's say we have a fixed order, and we know that France is the third or the fifth country, and let's say there are 7 countries, right? And France is either being visited third or fifth, and that would come. It can either come from a direct constraint. In other words, it could be a constraint that just says France is either third or fifth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it could come indirectly. It could come indirectly from the other constraints that preclude or exclude France from any other position. They can't be first and second, and they can't be fourth, sixth, or seventh. So the cumulative effect of other constraints, like they have one where they had M, right, from one hypothetical, and one constraint said M can't be first or second. And then there was a different constraint that M couldn't be fifth or sixth. Well, if you can't be first or second, and you can't be fifth or sixth, then you have to be third, fourth, or seventh.
Right.
So the way for me, right, I'm just doing 7 dashes.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, this is what I just did. Is the I have blur on. Let me turn that off. Like, can you see that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so this is the visual for it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I would do.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just doing the 7 lines. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say like there was 3 conditions. So in that case, I would instead, like you said, if it can't be like 1, 2, or 7, I'd put like 3, 4, I don't know, whatever numbers I didn't do it, and make like different dashes for each scenario.
Well, if you had, instead of you have, put that back on the screen, Julie, please. Yeah. In other words, you have France there at either second or fifth. Okay. So if there had been a third possibility that France could have been second, third, or fifth, you would simply have another set of dashes.
Yeah.
And put F in 3.
I understand.
Yeah. And so that's how you make it. There's a tiny percent of test takers who just do this in their head. And yeah, no, it's, well, as I say, they're free. I know them. I get along with some of them, but I understand none of them. So that's not me. I can't do this in my head. So the representation is critical. And what you have there is perfect. Is you're just simply, for me, I wouldn't go past 3 possibilities.
Okay.
Right. So in other words, if I had, F could be in 4 places, that's not going to do it for me. It's just too many. 3 is fine, and 2 is fine, and 1 is fine. If you say to me F is third, I can just draw 1 set of 7 lines or 6 lines, whatever it is, and put F in third. Mm-hmm. What you're trying to do is get information off the side of the page where you're just representing the individual constraints. You want to get them off the side of the page and put them in front of your eyes. So if I establish that F is third, and over here I have M is 1 or 2, well, then I want to take it from the side. I want to put the M in between the first and the second dashes and draw 2 little arrows. And that tells me M is 1 or 2. Now I don't need to be looking off to the side.
Mhm.
If you tell me in that same scenario, right? So say we have M is at 1 or 2 and F is at 3. If you also tell me that R and S are consecutive, and I have that off to the side, right? That R and S are consecutive, not necessarily in that order. Well, I'm going to take that off the side. And so long as you've told me that R and S are consecutive, then they cannot occupy slot 1, 2, or 3. Right? So they either have to be 4 and 5, 5 and 6, or 6 and 7. I'm going to take the R and the S. I'm going to put them above those open slots at 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'm going to put the R and the S. I'm going to put 2 lines under them. I'm going to draw a little arc above, which tells me they're reversible. And now everything's in, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the M. I don't know exactly where the M goes, but I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the F. I know where that goes. I'm looking at the R and the S. So 4 of the 7 are visual now, and they're in one place. Now, maybe they told me nothing about P. So there was no limitation on P. Well, then I'm going to take the P. So I would have that off here on the right. Initially, I'd have it off on the right. And the P would have a box around it, because the box to me means you can be anywhere. And I would take the P, and I would probably put it above the F with a box around it. And the box around it would tell me that P can go anywhere. So now I have 5 of the 7 letters, and now my eyes, my sense of sight can assist my reasoning, which is what I want to do. Your senses, the more senses you can use, the more aware you will be. So if you think about taking the test, right? And when we say, when you say you check out or you say you get tired, aren't you also kind of saying that your senses are not operating anywhere near their capacity? Well, take that into the test with you. And it's as simple as something that if, I'm not sure what they allow and they don't allow, but like if you were to take a Vicks inhaler and stick it up your nose, wouldn't you be slightly more alert than you were before you stuck the damn thing up your nose?
Mhm.
If you had somebody's going to object if you have a candle in the room? If a scent of a candle increases your awareness, right? Because your sense of smell is now elevated. Isn't that helpful?
Yes.
Again, I'm not, whether you do this or not doesn't matter, but if you had a peppermint, something you could suck on, wouldn't that activate your sense of taste? And wouldn't your sense of taste move you? Like if you think of a sliding scale where you're asleep all the way on the left, right? And then you're on fire all the way on the right. And I suspect we all have been in that place. Well, I don't know about you, but when I'm on fire, my senses are on fire. And the more they're on fire, the more I am. So there are things you can influence here. You're using the sense of touch because you're on the digital format. But I think sometimes we ignore, there are things we can do to stimulate ourselves. And one of them is the sense of taste. One of them is the sense of sight, which is what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to stimulate the sense of sight. right? One is the sense of smell. Like, why is it against the rules that I'm able to smell something that is increasing my alertness? So it is terribly important that you have a uniform system to activate the visual stuff. And then, so that's how you would do the visual stuff on the fixed order. On the relative order,
Oh,
you're
sorry. Before we move on, just because you explained, you had us, when you were explaining how you would do it, I actually diagrammed it. I just wanted to see if that's what you meant. So it's this section right here.
That's what I meant. I would do it slightly differently, but absolutely, Julie, you're capturing. In other words, when you look at those symbols, they tell you, see, I would only do the RS once. I wouldn't do it 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say R and S are in this band. They've got to be next to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and they're reversible, right? So I wouldn't put 3 of them in there. I'd put 1 of them in there.
I feel like I said up until this point, I feel like where I'm stuck now is how I'd like now like place them.
That would be okay.
Right.
Yeah. What you've done is perfectly fine. I would do it a little bit differently, but that doesn't mean what you haven't done is not perfectly fine. It is.
Mm-hmm. I guess like my question is like the next step from, I guess, the diagramming.
Well, the diagramming is creating the law.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
Right. What's going to happen then is the individual questions, you're going to have to apply the individual questions to that law.
Okay.
So if question number 3 said, if M is 5, which of the following must be true? Say something like that, right? Then for the purpose of question number 5, again, you're writing this down. The diagram never changes. So that would be in a heavy black pencil.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you're using to draw with, right? That information would never change.
Mm-hmm.
Say you come to question number 4, and question number 4 says, if M is 5, which of the following must be true? Now, in a light pencil, you take the M and you put it in slot number 4 or 5, whatever I said.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it were in 4, then you know that the whatever's next to the M would have to be in 5. Right. So in other words, but the information from the individual question is if you need to insert it, you simply insert it, which means you're now applying, okay, if I have M and S consecutive and you tell me M is wherever it is, right? Well, then it limits where S can be. And then for that question, I would write that in, answer the question, and then erase just that information.
Mm-hmm.
But the law itself, you never erase. So it answers every question. And what they're doing, Julie, is can you create the derivative law? And 2, can you apply what you created to individual situations that are going to arise? And well, that's law.
So to reiterate, the diagramming is creating the law. And the second part, when we're applying like the, I guess, conditions of like the answer choices, that is seeing if we can apply the law.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the answer choices. I would say it's the question. So in other words, if you're looking at question number 4,
Mm-hmm.
and it says, now, what are the 2 letters you have together that are reversible?
RNS.
I'm sorry?
RNS.
RNS. So let's say question number 4 said, okay, if R is 5, what must be true?
Yeah.
And then, and then for me, well, if R is 5, then F can't be 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you'd be down to either F at 3 or F at 7. And you would work those 2 universes and you say, okay, well, if R is at 5, S has to be at 4 or 6. So you would write in the R at 5, you put the S over it, 2 little arrows saying it's here or here. And then it's, if it was what must be true, you probably don't need the answer choices. Because you're just going to look at that and say, well, based on that, maybe putting the R in 5 would cause F to have to be in 3. In which case that would be the answer, right? So sometimes you do need, if it says what could be true, typically you're going to have to go through the answers until you get to the answer. If it says what must be true or what must be false, typically you don't have to look at the answers because it's there. You put the new information in, you're applying that to the existing law, and you're coming out with an answer. And it just takes practice, but it's so not formal logic. It's just, okay, here's a new situation, but I have a law. I know the situation is designed to be resolved by the law because that's the purpose of the entire section. So long as I have the law I'm supposed to have, I am going to resolve this.
Can I ask a question? If it says, say, F is either 1 or 6, it has to be 1 or 6, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So,
But we're saying or means that it cannot be both.
That's
if
impossible.
they want to say both, well, it would say that. It would say, it presupposing that character could go more than once, then it would say or both.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what I want to do is let's take a look at the one organizational type we didn't look at last week. So what you do is, and now this is the way you observe this, like you're sitting on the test, right? And what I want you to be able to do is say, all right, it's order. Now, is it fixed order or relative order? It's assignment. Okay. Then when it's assignment, is it assignment standing alone? Meaning, am I just assigning Scott to shortstop? Or is it assignment and order? Am I assigning Scott to shortstop and having him bat third? Okay. That's pretty much it. The only other type of organization is based on the concept of either or. And it's a very, very, very important. Again, it's like regular life. Who spends time thinking about the difference between if then and either or? Like if you've spent a lot of your time thinking about the difference between if then and either or, you're just a freak, just saying. But on this test, it's huge. It's not complicated, but it's huge. So the importance of it is demonstrated in that there's an entire set of hypotheticals built on your understanding of either or. You're going to see if then in a bunch of different examples both in logical reasoning, but in analytical. If then tends to be the weakest of all constraints. Because you're just saying, okay, well, if it rains, I'll get wet. Okay, well, you haven't told me anything about a sunny day. You just, so if I had 30 days and you say, well, if it rains, I'll get wet. And it rains 3 of the 30 days. Well, on 27 different days, I have no guidance because it didn't rain. So whether I'm wet or not on those 27 days, if I'm wet, it wasn't because it rained. I can get wet other ways. But if you say to me, if it rains, you'll get wet, then the only guidance you get is if it rains. Okay. So when you're in analytical reasoning, you're looking at maybe it's relative order, maybe it's fixed order, maybe it's assignment, and you see an if-then constraint. I mean, there are exceptions, but they're rare. That just means, oh, okay, if you tell me this, you've also told me that. But if you don't, I have no rule. So if you say to me, well, if H is third, G is fifth. Okay, well, If H isn't third, you haven't told me anything about G. You haven't told me anything about G. You just say H has got to be third. Right? For when this happens. I got that. But when H is not third, which is when H is first or second or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh, you've told me nothing about G. So G can be fifth when H is not third, and only has to be fifth when H is third. So it tends to be a weak constraint. Right? All an if then does is it says two things. One, when you activate it, you're stuck with it. So if you say if H third, right, and H is third, then you're stuck with it. The only other thing it tells you is if you say if H3, G5, and G's not 5, G's either 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 7, well, then H can't be 3. Because you said if H is 3, G's 5. Oh, okay. And I'm looking at this and you haven't told me anything about H, but I'm looking over here, G and G's 7. Well, then H can't be 3, Chuckles. So it's not complicated. It's just an if-then statement. The if is the law. When H is not third, there is no law. There's simply no law. There's no guidance whatsoever. All right? So when H is third, yes, I agree, G's got to be 5. When G is not 5, I don't care where the hell G is, H can't be 3. Because am I missing something, or just H can't be 3. You told me H is 3, G's 5. Now you say G's 6. Well, help me out here. So I don't see this as real complicated. All right. That's an if then. That's very different from either or. And so you really want to be aware of that language. Because if you're going to say to me, either G or H is 3, well then, hello. If I want to bifurcate on that, I can bifurcate on that because you're saying either G or H. So nobody else is 3. You with me? Nobody else. J can't be 3. K can't be 3. Either G. So it's just it's all language. And it's like in regular life. I hope you've never had a conversation like this. But in law, that's a really important distinction. So, excuse me. So analytical tests you on an understanding of that. So if you're doing something and it's relative order, and one of the constraints says, well, if G comes at some time before H, J comes at some time after L, something like that. It's just an if then. So yes, if you tell me G comes before H, then I'll worry about this other relationship, right? But if G's not coming before H, there is no rule and it doesn't impact this in any way. That's very different from either or. So either or is binary. It's got to be either one or the other. And what they do in analytical to test you on this is they've created an organizational method to test you. So the way you recognize it is, not surprisingly, it's either or. So like some of the examples that come to my mind, and I'll give you the list during working during the week. The birds are either in or out of the forest. That's it. That's not fixed order. It's not relative order. It's not assignment. It's either or. Either the birds are either in or out of the forest. The doctors are at either clinic X or clinic Y. Oh, either or. The fruit is either on sale or not on sale. Oh, either or. The dancers are either on or off stage. Oh. So the recognition of it is rarely an issue. If you're going to say to me, you're either selected or not selected for a committee. Okay, well, then I have the option of organizing the information this way. So that's what I want to work on. Now I'm going to let me get an example, and then we'll go into Law Hub. But bear with me, I need to go to my notes here. And go here to bear with me. Okay. So we're going to go to prep test 36. So let me go to Law Hub here. Do that. Okay, prep test 36. And just to run through these quickly, if you look at prep test 36, just give you look the example basically I just mentioned. So if you look at prep test 36, and it's section 1. And you go to questions 36, section 1. If you go to questions 1 through 6. And you say, okay, so let me just get that. Let me get my notes on this. Okay, so you guys read along because I'm going to leave Law Hub now, and I'm going to be reading from my diagram. But in terms of, going to what Julie raised earlier, which is how do you represent the diagram? How do you build it? What is the diagram supposed to look like? And here, does everybody see this is either or? In other words, if you say here that the stand's got to carry at least one kind of fruit, and the stand does not carry any other kind of fruit. So you're either carrying the fruit or you're not carrying the fruit. If you look at the constraints, right? If you carry kiwis, you don't carry, then you don't carry pears. If you carry tangerines, you carry kiwis. If you carry oranges, then you carry pears and watermelons. And if you carry watermelons, you carry figs or tangerines or both. We'll break it all down. But you get the concept is you're either carrying these things or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's what you're looking for. And then the diagram that I would come with that would look like this. So we share the screen, which means I need to be back up here. Share screen, go to notes.
Your screen is not sharing. Oh, never mind. Spoke too soon.
Okay. So again, this is the way I capture the information. Once you get this down, these constraints never change. So you do have to learn how to represent and visualize. That would take some time. But once you do it, it's very straightforward. So you guys are reading the language, right? So I'm just, for me, I'm going to infer from my diagram that the first constraint reads that if the stand carries kiwis, it does not carry pears, right? And all I've done here is there's always going to be a vertical line, and then a left hand and a right hand column. And here I'm going on the word carries. So it either carries or it doesn't carry. Okay. And this first constraint is if it carries kiwis, then it does not carry pears. Okay. So this is hugely different from if H is 3, G is 5, because that's in a continuum of 7. So, this is just 2. So you say to me, well, if K is carried, P is not. I'm using the asterisk as a substitute for the word if. And I'm using the asterisk to remind myself that that's the law. So this top law tells me if K is carried. That doesn't tell me anything about if K is not carried. The law is if or when K is carried, P is not carried. So that's the initial representation of the language of the constraint. When you have an if-then, but there are only 2 possibilities, you're in an either-or environment because you're either carried or you're not. All right, so I say, okay. So this says to me, if K is carried, P is not. Now, and here comes that word derivative, which is they're not gonna, they'll test you on this, but it's pretty basic, right? To say, okay, well, they had a constraint that said if K is carried, P is not. Like that's kind of hard to get wrong. But what that implies is this, and this really is what they're testing you on. If you say to me, if K is carried, P is not, then you've also said to me, if P is carried, K is not. Right?
Right.
Right. That's what they're testing you on. And if you just stop and think about it, right, you're saying, well, K's got to be somewhere, right? So if you say if K is carried, P is not, like the next step would be, okay, well, wait a minute. If you're going to tell me if K is carried, P is not carried, didn't you also tell me that both K and P are not carried?
Right.
Okay. And then the next step from that is, well, if you say to me, both K and P cannot be carried, then it must be the case that when P is carried, if P is carried, K cannot be carried. So this is the type of intelligence they're testing for. It doesn't require anybody to take formal logic. It doesn't require it ever to know what the word antecedent or consequent means. It may assist you in this, but it's not necessary.
Can we assume that the arrow substitutes for the word then?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
that's helpful. That's really helpful, actually.
And so with they only have about 7 constraints. So if you get this type of hypothetical, the number of constraints they have is very, very slight. So maybe it goes up to 7, but you're going to see the same. You're going to see the same constraints. So if you understand it now and take your time now, you'll recognize it when you take the test. And this is a simple if-then, where there are only 2 possibilities. So now I know if K is carried, P is not. I also know if P is carried, K is not. There's one other thing you need to know. Well, 2 other things, actually, which is the asterisks that can never happen because they're mutually exclusive. In other words, every time you see 2 asterisks like this, you immediately know it's impossible for K and P both to be carried. That's what this representation does for you. So it makes it visual. So if they say which of the following must be false, right? And one of the choices was both K and P must be carried, then that's the answer. That must be false.
Right.
Right. The second side of this is perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine just on this first constraint for both P and K not to be carried. That's perfectly fine. I don't have any law here. There's no asterisk here, right?
Right.
This is just, if P is not carried and K is not carried, that's fine. The only law I have is triggered when either K is carried or else P is carried. If I don't have either of those, well, then it's perfectly fine for P and K both to be over here. And one of the things they test you on are minimum and maximums. So what this tells you right now is on the carry side, at most, one of these two characters can be carried at most. And none of them have to be carried. On the other side, at least one of these two is not carried. And at most, both of them are not carried. And if you just spend time, like if you're doing this, the study group thing, and you break this down, and again, you can go back to prep test 35 and prep test 33, and you're going to find strikingly similar examples of this. And again, try to worry less about, did you get the answer right? And more about, have I created the law correctly? Because again, in the IRAC world, this is the rule. So if this is screwed up, you're toast. So that all that information comes from the simple prescription of, if K is carried, P is not. That informs me if P is carried, K is not. That informs me that it is impossible for K and P both to be carried, and it is perfectly possible that both P and K are not carried. Okay. And they repeat that constraint in the next one. In other words, if I'm reading, again, I'm not looking at the Law Hub, right? But if I've done this correctly, it says, if tangerines are not carried, kiwis are. Oh, okay. So now you want me to draw the arrow not from right to left, right? I'm sorry, not from left to right, but you want me to draw the arrow from right to left. Okay, I can do that. So if you tell me, if T is not carried, if tangerines are not carried, kiwis are, then really what they want me to do is to conclude that then it's impossible for tangerines and kiwis to both be on this side, right? Because tangerines throw the kiwis out, right? And therefore, if I do see the kiwis over here, like if the kiwis are not carried, well, then tangerines are. And right, and it's the same interpretive view. In other words, I can now interpret this as it's impossible for tangerines and kiwis both, for them both not to be carried. That's impossible. Just by looking at this, that's impossible. And I can look over here and say, but it is perfectly possible that kiwis and tangerines are carried. They don't have to be, but they can be. So do you see how the first and the second constraint were really identical in terms of how you interpret the constraints? You're identical. And is everybody okay up to now?
Because you say, if the tangerines, then, or not, then it's the kiwi. So that kind of makes sense. Or vice versa. Right?
Yeah. And okay. And again, this is brand new. You're seeing it for the first time. I do believe there are videos on this. I have at least one of these first three, like an old video on this. Now, watch how it begins to work. Forget about these bottom two constraints for now. Just look at the first two constraints. So if I were to say to you, if tangerines are not carried, what can you tell me about pears? If tangerines are not carried, what can you tell me about pears?
And pears aren't carried.
That's right.
Yep.
All you do is you say, okay, you've activated this rule, right? Because you said tangerines are not carried. So if these are not carried, kiwis are carried. Now you say, well, do I have any law about, so did you tell me anything about when kiwis are carried?
Mhm.
And you did. You told me when kiwis carried, pears are not.
Yes or not? Right.
All right. And how about if I say to you, if pears are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerines?
Tangerines are not carried. Or which is not carried.
Mhm.
If pears are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerines?
Tangerines are carried.
Carried.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
kiwi can't be carried.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Again, I just think the manner in which this material is presented, typically, you just don't see its connection to anything. It's too complicated. The language is too unfamiliar, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you can understand how this comes to be, the birth of this reasoning, right? If you can understand that, and if they've made this approachable, then you're going to ace it. Now, they don't have to make it approachable, and there'll be examples where this is simply hellish. But there are also examples where it's anything but hellish. So sure, I'm just brain dead. I'm just Peter. I just a lawyer from the Bronx. And he said to me, well, Peter, what's going to happen if pears are carried? Well, I'm going to say, well, first thing that's going to happen is that kiwis are not carried. And then I'm going to say, and son of a bitch, if kiwis are not carried, the tangerines are carried. And so the answer is the tangerines are carried.
Right. Because one has nothing to do with the other in that scenario.
Well,
Right.
I'm not sure I would phrase it that way, but if you can just follow, if you can create the diagram and you can follow it, it doesn't much matter how you phrase it. All I'm looking for is I need a starting point. So if you tell me, if you say to me P are carried, then you're telling me K are not carried. And then I do have law on K, and K are not carried, T are. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so that's one way they present it. Now here's an example of a different constraint which typically appears. So let's see what this is. And so if I'm reading this correctly, and again, I'm not looking at Law Hub, the original prescription is that if O is carried, both if orange is carried, both pears and watermelons are carried. So do I have that right?
Right.
And that's how you know you have it. When you can look at your diagram and repeat the words that appear in print, but you're not looking at the words in print, means you got it. So again, the first part of this is, can I just get it down accurately? Okay, that's done. The second part of it is, can I interpret this? And so think about what we did up here in these first two. First, we got them down correctly, but then we interpreted them correctly. And then after we interpreted them, so the interpretation is this completed scenario, right? But then after we interpreted them, we applied them, right? Because we interpreted the first constraint and the second constraint. But then I said to you, okay, well, if kiwis are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerine? And you were able to tell me tangerines are carried. Do you get that that's the application part? This whole bloody test is IRAC. And it is just, I think whether it's an elevated form of intelligence because most of us just don't get around to dealing with it, or it's an elevated form of intelligence because most of us can't do it, I don't know. But I'll be damned if I see what's so hard about it. What's hard about it is learning it. So here's another way I'm going to test you, which is I'm going to give you a constraint. So this constraint says, okay, when orange is carried, both pears and watermelons are carried. Doesn't this hypothetical make you want to have sangria? Can't you see all the fruit up there? And all it's missing is a little red or white wine, and a few ice cubes. So first I write this down, right? If oranges are carried, pears and watermelons are carried. Okay, I got that. And here's my if and here's my then. But what is the derivative of that statement? And see here, the derivative goes to the other side. All right. So you told me about things, both of which are carried, well, all three of which are carried. Okay, now I want to say, but what does that imply? Okay. So if you're going to say to me, when oranges are carried, both pears and watermelons are carried, doesn't this mean you can't have one of these two absent? Right? When orange is there, they're both there. In other words, this one is a magnet for these two.
Right.
Okay. So if the pears are not carried, then the orange cannot be carried.
Right.
Do you see it? If the
Yeah.
pears are not here, the orange cannot be here.
Right.
If the watermelon is not here, then the orange cannot be here.
Okay.
If neither one of them is here, then the orange can't be here. Talk to me.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, again, these never change. So these right now we have our second example of what constraints look like.
I have a question
Okay, go ahead, Julie.
to clarify. So just to be clear, so in my head, I'm thinking about it because that's how I use analogies. So let's say like the stand gets their stuff through shipping. I can assume like the oranges, pears, and watermelon come together. So if the oranges aren't there, that means that the shipping didn't come, and the pears and watermelons also are not there.
I'm not sure I would use, I mean, I'm not sure I would, I'm looking at this without the shipping thing. I'm just saying, okay.
Specific sect, like I'm saying, like when you say magnet, like as in like all three has to be present together. Like they're a package deal, all three.
Well, for the oranges to be there,
And
they all have to be together. But the pear and the watermelon could be there without the oranges.
okay.
So I just think you're putting a layer of complexity on it, just doesn't need to be there.
No, you
Yeah.
definitely clarified it for me. That's my question.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I see it as whoever's running the stand, right? So we come in the morning and we're working there, right? And whoever's the manager of the stand says, okay, if you put oranges on the stand, you got to put both pears and watermelon.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Well, then I need them both if I'm going to put oranges on the stand. So if I don't have pears, I can't have oranges. If I don't have watermelons, I can't have oranges. And clearly, if I'm lacking them both, I can't have oranges. So this never changes. When something is in the conjunctive, which is with the and, so conjunction is a fancy term for the word and. When it's an and, it changes to or. So if there is no P or no W, or you're missing both, then the oranges have to be something that's not carried.
Mhm.
And
So what go ahead.
no, catch your reader.
No, I was gonna say, so would the correct answer be C?
I'm not looking at any.
I'm not jumping. Go ahead.
It's not where I am, and nor is
All
it
right.
where you should be right now. It's about if you can create the law and just concentrate on creating the law, which is what we're doing here, the answers will come in due course. But if trying to get answers right pulls you away from this exercise, it's probably not the better place to be.
Okay.
So again, first thing I get is I represent the original constraint correctly. The second thing is I represent the derivative constraint correctly. And the final thing I need to do is to be able to interpret it. So on the carry side, there's no information about the pear and the watermelon. See, there's no asterisk over here. So I have no law. So if the pears are carried, it doesn't tell me a thing about watermelons or oranges. If the watermelons are carried, it doesn't tell me a thing about the pears or the oranges. So again, it's this asterisk is, if you have this, then you get that. Okay. But it doesn't say if and only if. That would be a different matter. If it said if and only if you have oranges, then you'll have pears and watermelon. That's a very different statement from if. This is just if, which is the weakest of all statements. All right. So fine. So what you want to do is just, again, if you guys can discuss this and reinforce it and try not to obsess over the answers, understand these constraints the way I understand them. And I promise you, the answers will come in due course. But if you don't walk it up the level to where I am, the answers will always be hit or miss. You'll get some right, you'll get some wrong, and you'll never really understand why. So the asterisk, that's the law. You don't give me that, I don't know squat. So to tell me that pears are carried doesn't tell me squat about whether oranges are carried. To tell me that W are carried doesn't tell me squat about it. If you tell me they're both carried, you haven't told me anything about oranges because there's no prescription. I mean, you could have pears and watermelons and not have oranges because I don't have any law on that. The law is if oranges are carried, then I got to have pears and watermelon. That doesn't mean I can't have pears and watermelon if oranges aren't carried.
Right.
So this is, again, it's stuff that it calls out for deliberation and thought and reflection. And you don't let, I'm going to take the test in October, interfere with an adequate understanding of what you're being tested on. And it's not kid stuff. I don't think it's just not kid stuff. And then again, I would generally have parens around this, but it doesn't matter. But this, the if is, if P or W or both are not carried, well, the no is not carried. So you could look at this and say, so W, if W is not carried, then I know O is not carried, but I don't really know anything about P. If P is not carried, well, then I know O is not carried, but I don't know anything about W. W could be either place. So talk to me. You guys see that because this is a constraint that typically shows up on the test.
Yes.
Okay, so now let's try an application of this. If I say to you, if O is carried, if oranges are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerines? If oranges are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerines?
It could probably be carried.
Yeah, because it says nothing about.
What did I hear a probably in there?
Wouldn't it be carried? It could be
Yes,
carried.
because
It is carried because
I'm already connecting the W, unless you just want us to just look at rule 3 and just keep it at rule 3.
No. I'm saying I want you. So now we've activated rule 1, rule 2, and rule 3. And I say to you, oranges are carried. And then the question I have, right, is okay, so now that we know oranges are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about tangerines?
the
No connection.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Marcos,
Yes,
what are you saying?
there's no connection if you're just looking at those 3 rules.
Okay, anybody have a contrary view?
Oh, I kind of see where I messed
isn't
up.
it? Can you have tangerines?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Isn't
you
it
can.
I would say yes.
So it's a question, and I'm asking you what must be true, right? So it's not a question of probability. I want something that must be true. So
Yeah.
If oranges are carried, what must be true of tangerines?
Tangerines could be carried.
Yes.
I agree.
Tangerines are carried. And again, you're just seeing it for the first time. Right. So picture, if this works, so I'll run it through. Okay, so if oranges are carried, then I know both pears and watermelons are carried, right? But let's say I only had the first three rules. Well, I don't have anything on watermelons in the first three rules, right? But I do have something on pears. So once I know that oranges are carried, I know pears are carried.
Right.
And then I come up here and say, well, son of a bitch,
If
when
they're-
pears are carried,
then not
kiwis are
kiwi.
not. So now I know kiwis are not carried, so that must be true.
Mhm.
Right.
But then I say, well, whoa, wait a minute. When kiwis aren't carried, tangerines must be carried.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I know when oranges are carried, tangerines are carried. Do you see it?
Yes,
When you break it down, it makes a lot more sense.
it might, yeah, it makes a lot more sense.
Well, would it be fair to say it might be more difficult to do well on this if you didn't have this understanding than if you do have this understanding?
Yeah.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, no one is being introduced to this way. So whoever you're competing against have no knowledge of this. Okay. And I urge you, take your time. Do not run to questions.
Yeah.
Say, am I creating the law? And then have I demonstrated an ability to apply the law?
I have a question.
Okay.
So, for oranges, if, how do I word this? Okay, for oranges, both must be, both must be present, which are pears and watermelons, for oranges to be present.
It's a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition. It's a necessary condition. Yeah.
Okay, so if that's the case, that means if oranges are present, then pears and watermelons are present.
Correct.
Mhm.
That's my question.
But it doesn't mean if pears and watermelons are present, that oranges have to be present.
It
Mm,
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't say must. It
Okay,
says
okay, okay.
right? If
Again,
I'm interpreting that correctly.
yeah, I wouldn't use that language, Sharita. I would say,
Okay.
my understanding of this, which is simply an if then,
Mhm.
is, and you can almost substitute the word when for the word if. They are different in regular life, but not so much on this test. You know, when O is carried, both pears and watermelon have to be carried.
Mhm.
So that just gives me information about when O is carried. That doesn't say this is the only condition under which pears and watermelon can be carried. It
Mhm.
just, you know, when O are carried, you have to have pears and watermelon. But that gives me no guidance about when O is not carried.
Okay.
You know, pears and watermelon can be there without oranges, but
Right.
oranges cannot be there without pears and watermelon.
Mhm.
And it takes
Okay.
repetition. This is how, again, going back to the guy who ran this to LSAC and then left and wrote a book. And the first thing he's writing in that book is, listen, I spent my life putting this together. Almost no one is going to prepare for this test in a short period of time. It's not the nature of the test. It's testing how you think. And more specifically, there's a regimentation to how we all think. Some of the regimentation is more advanced than others, but we all think in a regimented way. Well, lawyers think in the way we're going right now, which is, okay, I need to understand each constraint. That's the first step. I need to be able to interpret the constraint. In other words, I understand up here that when K is carried, P is not. And I understand that implies and requires that when P is carried, K is not. That's interpretation.
Excuse me, sorry, I have to go to
Oh.
work now.
Yeah.
But Peter, I will call you regarding like me logging in, but I have to log off now.
Okay,
Same.
you bet, Julie.
All right, thank you. Bye,
You're
everyone.
welcome.
Can I ask a quick question?
You
Peter?
may ask a slow
So,
question.
for the oranges, I think I'm understanding this right. So if the oranges are carried,
Mhm.
then the pears and the watermelon need to be present?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yep.
So it's that comma that's telling us this
Again, I'm
orange.
not looking at the text.
Oh, okay.
This is just what I'm reading here is, symbolically what the text says, which is if oranges are carried,
Right,
both pears and watermelons are carried.
right. Okay.
And there's no need to overthink this. That
Okay.
simply directs me that whenever I see the oranges being carried, then I got to see pears and watermelon there.
Pears and right.
And whenever oranges are not carried, I have no guidance. I don't know a damn thing about the pears or the watermelons.
Mm-hmm.
The if is a different from if and only if. If this says if and only if O are carried, pears and watermelons are both carried. That's different. That's not what it said. It said
So if they had an answer just with the pears and watermelon,
pears and
that would,
watermelon can be carried.
huh?
Pears and watermelon can be carried with
Okay.
or without the oranges.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I want to make sure.
Okay, and then just this final one. The original constraint now, instead of using the and, it used the or. So in this last one, if I've written this down correctly, it says, if watermelons are selected, then either figs or tangerines or both are selected.
Right.
So you notice how this said the and, this says or. And again, you're going to see these constraints. If they give you this type of hypothetical, you will see these constraints. So, okay, first thing is, do I understand this? Okay, so when watermelons show up, when they're on the stand, then either the figs are there without the tangerines, or the tangerines are there without the figs,
Mhm.
or they're both there. Both the one or both of them has to be there. Okay. So the explicit constraint says to me, the watermelons are not alone. That's not possible. The watermelons has to be accompanied by at least one of these two,
Either or, right,
and it can be accompanied by both of them.
or both.
Let's say, so that's the explicit constraint. And what they want from you is the derivative of that. So the derivative of that is, okay, if you're saying to me, for the watermelons to be carried, you got to have the figs or the tangerines. Well, then you're also saying, if both the figs and the tangerines are absent, well, then the watermelons can't be carried, because the watermelons, the watermelons need either the figs or the tangerines to be there. They can both be there, but it has to have one of those two.
One or other. It has to accompany one or the other.
So the derivative is, if the figs and the tangerines are both not carried, then the watermelons are not carried.
Which makes sense.
And if you spend time with it, it'll make more and more sense. And so again, this tells me nothing here about if the watermelons are not carried. I don't know anything about the figs and the tangerines. I just know the watermelons are not carried. And if
Right.
you go over here and you say the figs or the tangerines or both are carried, that doesn't, these arrows are not going in both directions. They're going from left to right. So, and then from that I say, okay, so now I give you another application to see if you understand it. If I say to you, if the, okay. How about if I say to you, if the figs are not carried. If the figs are, well, let me try this. If the figs and the tangerines, let me give them both. If the figs and the tangerines are not carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about the oranges?
They're not carried?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And again, that's the that test, whether you really are. So again, forget about the bloody answers for now. If you were sitting down as a group and you challenged one another to apply what you're looking at, and not just on this, but again, there are 2 more of these that I'll be sending you from exam 35 and exam 33, where it has, basically these same constraints. And just challenge one another to see if you can apply the law that you've created. You're in business. Again, if I say to you, okay, well, if the watermelons are carried, so if the watermelons are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about the figs? So if the watermelons are carried, what, if anything, can you tell me about the figs? Be careful.
They can or cannot be carried.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Really, you can't tell me anything. Because if you tell me the watermelons are carried, well, okay, now I know the figs are carried. But do you see there's no law up here affecting when figs are carried? So you wouldn't be able to go any further. You say, okay, the watermelon and the figs are both going to carry, but that's all I know.
Can you go back to the one with the orange and the figs? Because that one kind of threw me off.
You got to help. You got to give me something more specific than that.
Because if the figs or the tangerines are not carried, then that means the oranges.
I need the if, Sharita. I need to know what the if was.
If the figs and the tangerines.
There you go. There you go. So now you direct me here. So if this condition is met, then the watermelons are here.
Right.
That takes me up to this condition, which is if P or W is here, then the oranges are here. So if you say to me the figs and the tangerines, not one of them, but if they're both present, that means the watermelon is present. Yeah. And then the third constraint says, well, if W is present, the orange is present.
Okay. All right. I didn't see that one.
All right. All right. Good.
Here's a tricky question, Peter. So me looking at like all the rules, so does that mean if K is in, no one's in?
Oh, I have to just took down my notes. Hold on, go back. So if K is carried, does it mean nobody else is carried? Well, if K is carried, then you'd say
S could be.
Well, one step at a time. If K is carried, then you know that P is not carried.
Right.
If P is not carried, then you know that O is not carried. And then it dies. Then I don't have any further information. So if you were to say to me, K is carried, I can tell you that P and O are not carried. I can't tell you anything about the other 3 letters. It's perfectly possible that T is there with K. Can't tell you anything about it. So you know when a road comes to a dead end because you run out of law. So that answers that question, Felix?
Yes.
Marcos, I'm sorry.
Yes, no, that's fine. It does answer it.
Okay. And that's what I want you to be doing is, again, try to get away from, oh crap, I got question number 4 wrong. Just get out of there. You're going to have forever to get questions right and wrong. But if you learn how to create the law and then how to apply the law, you're going to get the vast majority of these questions correct. But the first thing is first. You got to walk before you can run. All right.
That makes sense.
All right. Well, let's say I will send you the reading comprehension notes. And I will send you, what I'd like you to do is certainly this week, is I'll send you examples of the either or hypothetical that I want you to work on. Right? And then when we come back next week, we'll start off with whatever reading comprehension we have, and then we'll double back down on these sort of either or hypothetical. And then I want to spend some time on understanding the difference between an if-then statement, an only if statement, and an if and only if statement. And you're heavily, heavily tested on that in both logical reasoning and in analytical reasoning. And it's all about the little words. All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, you guys get out there. Saturday. This Saturday doesn't come back. You know what I'm saying? This is it. Once this is over, it ain't coming back, and neither are you. All right. So make the best of this Saturday. Have a kick-ass Saturday and Sunday and the rest of your life. And
Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.
do my best. All right.
Thank you, Peter. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
being here and for being on camera.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, goodbye to au revoir. Goodbye sounds like a
Bye.
goodbye, you know. Let's go with au revoir.